This week's topic is classism. When we define class, we're talking about a large group of people who occupy a similar economic position in the wider society based on income, wealth, property ownership, education, skills, or authority in the economic sphere. I would love for you to go to the link that I have posted here. It kind of walks you through what it's like to live in poverty. Um, and it gives you an idea of what it would be like to try to make it when you make minimum wage.
Economic inequality in America has been growing since the late 1970s. The top 1% of Americans now make more money than the bottom 40%. That's roughly 3 million people out earning 110 million. 20% of the population owns 84% of our private assets, leaving the other 80% of the population with 15.6% of the assets. In 1960, the wealth gap between the top 20% and the bottom 20% of Americans was 30-fold. 4 decades later, it is more than 75-fold. Either way, wealth or income, America is more unequal, economists generally agree, than at any other time since the start of the Great Depression, and more unequal than any other developed nation today.
Class identity refers to a label for one category of class experience, such as ruling class, owning class, middle class, working class, and poor.
Classism includes individual attitudes and behaviors, systems of policies and practices that are set up to benefit the upper classes at the expense of the lower classes, resulting in dramatic income and wealth inequality. The rationale that supports these systems and these unequal valuing is called classism. Classism is the systematic oppression of subordinated class groups to advantage and strengthen the dominant class groups. It is held in place by a system of beliefs and cultural attitudes that ranks people according to economic status, family lineage, job status, level of education, and other divisions. Examples of internalized classism include feelings of inferiority to higher class people, disdain or shame about traditional patterns of class in one's family, and denial of heritage, feelings of superiority to people lower on the class spectrum than oneself, hostility and blame toward other working class or poor people, and beliefs that classist institutions are fair. Some examples of class privilege include personal contacts with employers, good childhood health care, inherited money, speaking the same dialect and accent as people with institutional power. Opportunity or mobility, the likelihood of moving up the ladder, is a tricky thing to measure, but most experts agree that there is less of it than there was 2 or 3 decades ago, and less of it in America than in a good many of what our parents and grandparents might have called the class-ridden societies of Europe. A child with parents in the bottom earning fifth of Americans now has a roughly 7% chance of reaching the top fifth as an adult. By contrast, a child with parents in the top fifth has a 42% chance of winding up there.
We can think of class on a continuum between the have-mores and the have-nots. You can think of this continuum as also including dominance at the top of it. This would be the ruling class and the owning class. The mostly dominants, which we might also call the middle class and the haves. The mostly subordinates, which we might call people who are working class. And then finally the subordinates, those who are poor or low income and have not. This is a little matrix that I think you might find interesting, and what it does is it breaks up some different topics, education, money, worldview, etc., and shows you how these topics are valued by three different classes: poverty, middle class, and wealth. So just as an example, and I'd like for you to spend a little bit more time looking at this and kind of thinking about how this might be relevant in your own life and in your childhood and then in lives of other people you might know. So let's look at, for example, food. When we're looking at the way that a person in poverty might view the concept of food, the key question is, did you have enough food? So we're talking about quantity being the most important question related to food. When we're talking about someone in the middle class, the key question is, did you like it? So we're focused more on quality and less on quantity. And finally, with the wealthy class, we're talking more about presentation. So was it presented well? So I think this is a neat way of kind of looking at how different classes may view important aspects of social life. So take some time to kind of appreciate this chart before you move on, if you would.
Three-quarters of the students at the most elite private colleges come from upper middle class or wealthy families. Only 5% come from families with household incomes under $35,000. Half a century after Brown versus Board of Education, poor children of color, and regardless of color, are routinely and increasingly assigned to schools filled with other poor children, a practice with a long proven record of failure. The college enrollment gap between low and high income Americans is widening, even as the economic value of a college degree continues to increase.
We can also look at graduation rates according to social class. This is obviously a chart from quite some time ago, from the early 90s. But researchers that looked at this data said that the same rates actually hold true. So if we look at family incomes that were over $75,000 in 1991, we see a graduation rate of over 80%, college graduation rate. Whereas if you have a family income of under $25,000, that graduation drops to almost just a tad over half. So you can see there's certainly a correlation between class and graduation status. So we'd like to talk a little bit about how we can become class allies then and address these issues of social injustice related to class. A class ally is a person from a more privileged class whose attitudes and behaviors are anti-classist, meaning that they are committed to increasing his or her own understanding of the issues related to classism and are actively working toward eliminating classism on many levels. We can make several assumptions about social class. We know that social class is a collection of subcultures arranged in a hierarchy of prestige. We know that one's social class of origin, which is where one came from, is different than one's current felt social class, where we think of ourselves now, and these are both different than our attributed social class, meaning what others think of us. We also know that there are certain class assumptions that come along with being a member of a particular class. We know that there are differences according to different social classes, so you have different expectations depending on what class you consider yourself to be in and what class other people consider you to be in. There are different assumptions based on the economic capital that you have, so your economic worth, as well as your ability to readily spend money. There are differences relating to cultural capital, also social capital, and academic capital. So it's important to recognize that all of the different kinds of capital that you have, that a person has in their life, can be affected by class, and that the assumptions that one makes according to one's social class have an impact on many different aspects of your life. I have some links here that provide additional information on classism. One that I'd really like to point out is this book that I think is fantastic. It's by Barbara Aaron Wright, and it's called Nickeled and Dimed on Not Giving By in America. And Barbara Aaron Wright is a journalist who went undercover in several different cities across the U.S. to try and see if she could make it on a salary of a minimum wage salary, and it kind of talks about her experiences. And I think you'd really enjoy it if you took the time to read it. So anyway, that's it for Classism this week. I hope that you'll take the time to explore some of these additional resources as we move forward.